now have the pleasure of introducing an amazing woman. From the moment I met her, I could hear in her voice her passion for her work and how she creates safe spaces for families to work with law enforcement, government entities, and social services agencies. Some of the words that came up earlier when Ron was talking about, she embodies just creating a sense of belonging and safety and ensuring that our families feel heard and seen. Ms. Laura Drino is the director of the Child Abuse Policy and Prevention for the LA City Attorney. She has spent the majority of her career in the Family Violence Division and Child Abuse Prosecution Section in her office. As a prosecutor for more than 26 years, she has tried over 125 jury trials to verdict. Most of her trials were crimes against children or where children were witnesses. Laura has received training in the areas of internet crime against children from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, the FBI, and from multiple law enforcement and child maltreatment agencies. She has worked closely with multidisciplinary agencies here in Los Angeles to prosecute cases involving sexual abuse. She leads the LA City Attorney's Initiative on children exposed to gun violence in South Los Angeles by working closely with the Los Angeles Police Department and other social service agencies such as CII and Tessie Cleveland by coordinating a crisis response team called REACH, the REACH team, which she'll talk to us about. And they intervene within the first 24 hours to reduce trauma for children exposed directly or indirectly with gun violence. And with that, Laura, thank you for joining us in our day of learning. And I will be handing you the floor. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm really excited because I recently got an amazing tour of Children's Bureau, and I'm hoping to work more closely with Children's Bureau as we expand the work that we're doing in South and Central Los Angeles right now. I guess my bio was a little out of date because I now have 29 and a half years with the city attorney's office. I went to college thinking I was going to get my master's in social work and do social work. And then I met somebody who was a prosecutor, and that kind of changed my path. And I've spent my whole career just trying to help primarily women and children with domestic violence and child abuse as a prosecutor. For 14 years, I just prosecuted child sex abuse cases and was very passionate about giving kids a voice in the courtroom and making them know that we believe them. So that was my passion for years. And then the city attorney made me the director of child abuse policy and prevention towards the end of 2017. And he told me to go to Southeast LA and create a program that helps lots of kids. And that was like my direction. And I have to be honest with you, obviously, I am a white woman going into Southeast LA, which is primarily a Black and brown community. Last I heard, a little over 60% Latinx and the other Black. And I decided that the only way that I was going to really build trust in the community was I needed to be a really good listener. And so I spent 6 to 9 months really just listening to what the community was concerned about. Because one of the things that I always worry with government agencies like city attorney or DCFS or mayor's office or whatever it may be is we can't come in thinking we know what the community needs and that we're going to fix it, because that kind of attitude is very elitist and it really doesn't help the community. What helps the community is feeling that what's important to them is what's being addressed. And so I went to schools, I talked to principals, I did small presentations about children exposed to violence, trauma, all kinds of violence. And then I would do a questionnaire for the parents, asking them what were they most concerned about for their kids. Was it gun violence? Was it graffiti, gang violence, lack of parks and safe places for their kids to play, or domestic violence? And I would have them rank them in order of what was most important to them. And what I kept seeing the concerns was gun violence was the number one concern. And this is back in 2017, and gun violence has probably tripled now since 2017. COVID made everything worse. It feels like, and I think I was quoted in an article saying this recently, it feels like everybody has a gun. And COVID made things happen where, like in a road rage incident, it used to be that, you know, people would flip each other off or something, and now they're shooting at each other. It's really alarming to see what's happening, and we're really trying to make a difference for these kids. But what I found was I needed a way to help the parents understand what this trauma was doing to their kids, the day after day trauma. And so I was lucky enough to partner with Children's Institute, which has a campus in Watts, which is part of Southeast Los Angeles. And they helped develop the program for us, the Children Exposed to Violence program, and we're called the REACH team. We're a crisis response team. I also had to bring in LAPD because you can't be a crisis response team if you don't know where the crisis is. You don't know what happened, because otherwise you find out way later. And so we wanted to make sure that we could either go to the scene right as it happened and offer crisis counseling to kids, or respond to the family within the first 24 hours of the incident. So after I listened, I went to community meetings, I went to Watts Gang Task Force, I went to neighborhood council meetings, I went to neighborhood watch meetings. And again, I just listened. And what I found when talking to people and explaining what I was thinking of doing, I literally had grown men get tears in their eyes and say, I needed this when I was a kid. And these are gang interventionists, a lot of them, who, you know, spent time in prison and now they're back out in the community trying to help, trying to, you know, quell the violence. If there is a shooting, trying to, you know, shut down rumors of who did it so that there's not retaliation. But they were telling me, you know, men in their 40s and 50s were telling me, I wish this existed when I was a kid, because maybe it could have gotten me on a different path. And I know everyone I'm speaking with here understands about trauma and that you all are very familiar with the ACE study, but most people aren't. And so what I found is and lucky for me, I started this work in 2017, right when the 20-year report came out on the ACE study. I got to see Dr. Folletti speak a couple times. I met Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. I read her book. I educated myself as much as I could on adverse childhood experiences and trauma, because obviously I'm a lawyer, but my passion's always been about trauma for kids and helping them overcome it. And so when I would explain to parents, when I would speak with them, I would say to them, here's my concern. My concern is there is a shooting and a homicide a block away from your house, and you have to walk your child to school past that scene where there's flowers and candles and everything memorializing the person and what happened last night or what happened 2 nights ago. Even if your child doesn't know the person that died, it's affecting them whether they say it or not. And I would say to the parents, and say your child is in third grade, and third grade's when you learn your times tables. And so you walk past those candles and those flowers on your way to school, and you drop your child off at school, and now they're supposed to sit in their seat and learn their times tables. But in their little brains, because they maybe didn't feel like they should ask you about it, or they really didn't think a lot about it till they were sitting at school, they're thinking, is my mom going to make it home okay? Somebody died there. Somebody was murdered there. Am I going to get shot when I'm walking home from school today? Who was shot? All those little thoughts are going through their brains. And this is what I would explain to the parents. And whether you think your child is aware or not, they actually are. Research shows that kids like under 2 years old can pick up on all of that. They hear people talking. They might not have a lot of words, but they understand that something's happening. And so then your kid can't focus because all these thoughts are in his or her little head, and they start acting out in class. And now they get in trouble. And now the teacher tells you they have ADHD and you need to take them, and maybe they need medicine, or they keep acting out and they keep getting in trouble. And now they get labeled the bad kid. And that bad kid label goes with them all the way through elementary school, because when the teachers are in the lounge, they're like, oh, you have, Joe Smith next year. Good luck with that. He's really difficult. And I work closely with LAUSD, very closely with their mental health team. And, we're just constantly trying to educate people that a lot of these kids don't have ADHD. They have trauma. They have PTSD, community PTSD. And what we found is reaching these kids through community trauma or gun violence trauma that was happening outside of their homes was a way for parents to accept that my kid might need some help, because we weren't blaming the parents. We weren't saying to them, hey, it's because of, the drug use, the domestic violence, the child abuse, the, alcoholism, or whatever that's happening inside your home. There's a lot going on outside that is affecting your child. And when we could explain to the parents how that was affecting them, and even some parents, we would talk about the brain science and how it rewires their little brain into that constant fight or flight mode. And that their brains are so, plastic at that age that if we intervene now, we can fix some of that. We can correct some of that so that they're not always in that panic state. And when I would talk, I also did some youth focus groups, and I talked to kids, and the kids were telling me, I'm so tired of the grownups saying, this is normal. Like, this is South LA. This is what happens here. Like, get over yourself, get over it. You're fine. And that attitude, the kids were saying, like, I wish the grownups would stop saying that, because it shouldn't be normal. And that's what really spoke to me, was the kids wanted the grownups to stop normalizing it and do something about it. And so I really spent a lot of time with different, groups. And so I feel, I see in the chat, and yes, I totally agree about the ADHD, and the symptoms can look the same. And that was something I would say to the parents as well. And of course, I always qualified. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I, have talked to a lot of doctors and psychologists, and I have educated myself in this area. But I built trust with the families, with the parents, by understanding that things were different, things were difficult, things needed to change so that their children could have the best chance of being who they were supposed to be, who they wanted to be. They could do anything in life. But when they get labeled that bad kid, to me, that's the into the juvenile justice system because now they're labeled that bad kid. And so when people ask me, why are you doing this? You're a prosecutor. Why are you doing this? I say to them all the time, because I understand trauma. I worked with kids. Child sex abuse is probably the most debilitating adverse childhood experience that exists left untreated. And I was actually on a Zoom yesterday with someone from a foundation, and I was saying to them, if you have the capability to research, I've done my own little research, but I think there needs to be research because I think that the majority of the school shooters were sexually abused, because I've done my own little research, but obviously I don't have the ability to dig the way a research team could dig. But I really believe that that can be the root cause of some of these school shootings. I mean, even the one that happened, just this week, I wouldn't be surprised if there was sexual abuse there. So I am always trying to tell people that kids are not born bad. Kids are inherently good, and bad circumstances happen to children that cause them to act out. And if people could stop labeling children and have more empathy and understanding of what might be happening in their life or what they're being exposed to, it would just, I feel like it would change a lot. So I think that's like one of my missions with people I work with, particularly with LAPD. And I have to say, at least in South LA, I think I've made a dent with the officers in understanding adverse childhood experiences, understanding trauma. I've done training now for the officers because so many of them have untreated adverse childhood experiences. I cannot tell you how many officers became police officers because they witnessed domestic violence and they wanted to be the hero to save their mother. And they chose the career because they wanted to do good. But what I say to them when I talk to them is, if you never dealt with it, if you never processed what you witnessed as a child, if you don't understand that in that moment when the abuse was happening, there were so many levels of trauma and so many things happening that you couldn't even articulate, because not only were you witnessing the violence, but if the violence was by your father or even a stepfather who you saw as a father, now this was somebody that could hurt you. This is somebody that was hurting your mother. And your mother is the person that's supposed to be taking care of you. She's supposed to be your core. She is supposed to be the person that can protect you. And if she can't even protect herself, how is she going to protect you? And I try and explain to the officers, this is so deep that if you never really processed it, every time you go to a domestic violence call, you're triggered. Whether you want to admit it or not, you are triggered. And you are going to handle that differently. You're either going to go completely numb, and this is just a job, go in, get the perpetrator, do this, and it's just check the box. And you've lost all your empathy and all your understanding, or you're going to be triggered and you may overreact towards the suspect. You may overreact to certain things because you never were able to really process it. And I say to them when I'm doing training, because now they have me doing some training at the academy, I'm like, I want you to promise me that once the scene is safe, that you take a minute or two to talk to the child that's there. Say to that child, we are here to protect you. We are here, buddy, to protect you and protect your mom. Otherwise, you're the bad guy. You're causing trauma too, because they see you come into the house, you don't even talk to them, and maybe you take their dad away in handcuffs. and they're 4 years old. That's what they think of the police. But if you take those minutes to get down on your knee, what you probably wish the police did when you were a little boy or little girl, and say to them, hey, buddy, we're just here to make sure your mom and you are safe. And we're going to, take your dad or your stepdad out for a little bit just so that things can calm down, or however you say it to these kids, it's going to make a difference. Because one of the things that I found is for many, many years, I worked with LAPD detectives on cases that went to trial. And so I had a lot of relationships with detectives, but I had my opinions about police, just like, everybody does. Just like I always say to people, in every profession, you have, great, hardworking people, and you have the people that you're like, eh. I mean, even in my own office, like there's people that I'm like, they wish they weren't doing that case. And the same is true in the police department. And what I found when I started working with them was I was shocked, like how bright some of them are and how caring some of them are, and how many of them are literally out of their own pockets every day, buying food, encouraging kids to get good grades. And I saw a kid run up to an officer one day with his report card, and he's like, oh, looks like you earned yourself a pair of Jordans. And again, out of his own pocket, then he went to the Nike store and bought the kid some brand new shoes because he had gotten all A's and B's. He was up from getting D's and C's. And so it changed my perspective of a lot of police officers, how much they do care about kids, especially. And so I think if we're ever going to change the narrative, we have to train our police to be more trauma informed. And I work with a captain over the Community Safety Partnership, and with their whole team, which is a really community-based policing. And crime is down in all the CSP, community-based policing sites, which are the housing developments and a couple parks. Like homicides down by 80% in those areas. Victim shot is down by about 35%. So it does make a difference because they work with the community. They are working hand in hand with the community. If it's a little scuffle, they try and get the community to handle it without them having to do a lot of enforcement. So I was really impressed when I saw that. So I work with them. And what I find is the officers now call me all the time. I mean, almost too much, asking for help. Laura, we just came across this family, and we found out that 2 years ago, the mom was murdered in El Salvador, and the dad the dad's here, and the kids are really suffering. And can you help us? And so then, we'll get them connected through either our program or through Tessie Cleveland to mental health services for the whole family, so that they can process what happened and everything. So I feel like we have the team. We have 5 care coordinators and 3 full-time therapists, and myself, and I have 2 administrative coordinators who work closely with me. We're grant funded. That's another thing. I get a lot of community say, well, we've been doing this work for a long time. This was a big thing I got at the beginning. We've been doing this work for a long time, and now the government comes in and you guys get all the money and do it. And I try and explain to them, listen, it's not like somebody just gave us money. Like, we have to write grants, and it's a lot to write the grants, but I want you as my partner. I can't do this myself. I need the community to work with me, to believe in the message that violence affects children. I should back up. We started with gun violence, and we launched in September 2018, the REACH team. And we were really boots on the ground, I would say January of 2019. We started in just gun violence in Watts. And then we expanded because the community actually embraced it. They said we needed it. This is the missing piece. We never do anything for the kids that are witnessing this. And we expanded to all of Southeast Division of LAPD. That was in 2020. Then COVID hit. We worked all through COVID. We were out in the field. We were responding, obviously masks and gloves, and we would talk to the families outside. We would stay outside their house. And we realized that it was all violence was affecting kids. Gun violence was going up and up and up and up and was at an all-time high in 2021. But it was all violence was affecting children. And as you all know, I mean, kids weren't being seen in 2020 and part of 2021. They weren't being seen by the mandated reporters. There was a lot going on inside the homes from stress of COVID and lack of working and trying to do online schooling. But again, the parents became more willing to accept mental health services for their kids during COVID. That was like the one blessing of it is mental health support became okay. Like there wasn't the stigma because it was COVID, that COVID was stressing everyone out. And then on top of it, this violence occurred. And so we started getting more and more people accepting services during that time. But recently, we were able to get a SAMHSA federal grant and a what's called BJA grant from the government to expand our program. And so now we are in 2 full police divisions, Southeast and 77th Division, which unfortunately are the 2 most violent, high crime, high homicide shootings divisions of LAPD. So we're in both of those divisions. And then we have expanded with those grants also into Newton Division, which is considered central LA, but it's still pretty south. It's east of the 110 freeway and south of the 10 freeway, all the way up to downtown LA. And so in that area for this year, we just expanded 2023. We are in the Pueblos, which is housing development in Newton Division, and South Park. And then we are also starting in part of Southwest Division in Baldwin Village. So those are our two new areas. But I've been doing a community needs assessment as part of this grant to really find out again, what does the community want? Because it's not just about, for SAMHSA, it's not just about the REACH team or mental health. It's also about community resilience. What do we want to see? How are we going to build the community up? How can the community become more resilient following that? This grant came following the summer of 2020 and the civil unrest that occurred in Los Angeles. And finding a way to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement, also destigmatizing mental health. And that's what I'm really looking for. And I have, I put together a council of 22 people called the Recast Council. The grant is a recast grant. And we had our first meeting last week, and it went better than I could have ever hoped for. It was community members, clergy, schools, the mayor's office, law enforcement, nonprofit, and I'm forgetting someone, but and more. But listening to the community members, listening to the clergy, hearing what their ideas were, was just really inspiring. And I saw last night, I was at a community event in South Park, and I ran into a couple people that were there. And they told me how excited they are that this is a 5-year grant and we're going to really work together. And we're not giving them money per se. It's just they know that like we want to make a change. We want to make things better. We want it to be okay to say, I need help, not just for the kids, but for the grownups. And one of the things that I really have been trying to do is reach out to in like the housing developments in Watts. There are 5 housing developments. If you're not familiar, there are 5 housing developments in 2.2 square miles with thousands of children. And each housing development is run by a different gang. And again, that was eye-opening to me. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and pretty much the 80s. I went to high school and college in the 80s. And I, was in law school during the height of gang violence in Los Angeles, the very late 80s, early 90s. And I was surprised because I've done family violence and domestic violence. I've kind of been out of the gang world. I did clerk during law school at the gang unit for the DA's office. And I was surprised like how still like people from, Jordan Downs can't go over by Nickerson Gardens and they can't cross over certain streets. And it breaks my heart for these kids. Like, it's just, when are we ever going to get away from that for these children? They need to be able to interact with each other, not be afraid. And so one of the things that we have been doing is we are working with a big group of partners, especially in Watts, of different nonprofits and the Community Safety Partnership Police, who have built relationships in those developments with parents, with kids. They run, if you've heard of the Watts Rams, it's sponsored by the LA Rams, but some of the parents and the officers are the coaches. And the officers started it and put it together, but they try and bring parents in to get more engaged. And now there's like, I think it's over 300 kids are now part of the Watts Rams program. Well, we have kids from Nickerson and Jordan and Imperial Courts and Gonzaga. They're all playing together on the Watts Rams. They're a team together. And the idea is if we can do more of that, then maybe later as they grow up, they'll be like, oh no, he's cool. Like I used to play football with him, and stop that you can only be here, you can't talk to this person, and all of those things. Also changing the relationship with the police. So for example, I met some kids one day and they told me they were afraid of the police. And I said to these 2 brothers, and I said, I get that. But I know these really cool officers I want you to meet. And are you okay with that? And they said, sure. So I introduced them to the officers. They loved football. They got onto the Watts Rams, and Evan was on Good Morning America talking about the Watts Rams and said on national TV, I used to be afraid of the police, but now I realize they're like dads and they're uncles and they're whatever. And I actually see them as a father figure now. I mean, to go from I'm afraid of the police, I don't want to talk to the police, to saying that on national TV was huge. And I'm seeing that a lot over the last 4 years that I've been working in the community, that we are changing the narrative between law enforcement and the next generation. Again, on the news, you never hear of anything. In the news, it's like, oh, everybody in South LA hates the police. Well, if you're boots on the ground, that's not true. That's just not true. If you are talking to people in the community, it's just not true. Not everybody hates the police. And so by giving kids after school activities and other things to do, rather than just be, oh yeah, I see East Side Riders Bike Club, amazing, amazing. I love them, love John who runs it. There are just so many programs that we have there. There's an amazing after-school program called Strive. It's privately funded, where they catch kids up so that they're at grade level. There's tutoring, there's incentive programs, there's enrichment activities. It's on, I think, Main and 92nd. And when you walk in, it's just like an oasis. They have a garden in the back. It's so peaceful. There are a lot of opportunities for kids to find something that they're interested in, and not be stuck at home all day, because I think it's important for these kids to see that there's other stuff out there. So one of the things that we're doing with this grant is try to build more youth programming, and so that kids have other opportunities. They can see the world outside of them. We have a teen outreach program called the Wyman Tots program that we're doing in the community and some of the schools. We're working with a woman who runs a program called Marching Beauties. It's her nonprofit, and it's for girls between 12 and 18. It's like young women's empowerment, self-esteem building. Trayana Rankins runs it. She does an amazing job with these girls. They come back, they're, Marching Beauty alumni, and they come back and talk to the girls and do community work with us sometimes. So there are so many great programs out there, but we're continuing with this grant to try and build more youth programming, but also adult programming. So we have partnered with a nonprofit that does trade school. So when we work with a family, the Reach team, and we find out that mom or dad is out of work, but they want to work, we set them up with Manny, who does career counseling with them and gets them into the right trade school, because he says to them, I don't want you to just have a job. I want you to have a career. I want you to have something you're passionate about. And so he will set them up and get them into a trade school. I was in Nickerson Gardens with 6 bounty hunter bloods and Manny, and I was there to talk about mental health and for the kids, and Manny got them, well, actually there was about 10 of them, but 6 of them signed up for trade school, and they are now either welders or truck drivers. And these are 6 hardcore, I mean, they were older, but bounty hunter bloods from, back in the 90s. And now they have jobs that pay them like $35 an hour. And it was interesting. I think I told Karina this story, is I said to them about, that I'm worried for the kids, that everything, the shootings, everything that goes on is hard for the kids. And obviously I was kind of like a little worried to say this, because I know some of them caused this trauma at least years ago, hopefully not recently. But I said, you have kids, like, let us help. Like, we're not DCFS. We don't have anything to do with DCFS. All we care about is supporting your family, however that may look like. Do you need diapers? Do you need food? Whatever you need, we have care coordinators, case managers who will figure out how to help make your family whole, make them stable, so that you feel comfortable getting mental health support for your kids, or wellness support. I don't use the word therapy. I usually say wellness support, or just like you go to the doctor to talk about some things with your body. This is like a doctor to talk about problems or stress that your kid feels. When kids say that you all know this, have a stomach ache, but they're not really sick, that's trauma, that's stress. And I try and explain that to parents too. But it was so funny, because these former or current gang members, I'm not sure, obviously I don't ask. When I said to them, listen, if you don't want to say it right now that you want our help, it's okay. I'm around, and, you can just, or tell one of the officers or somebody that you want to talk to me, and I will make sure that we get your family support. And one of them said to me, oh yeah, we know who you are. We see you here all the time. We call you the white lady that helps kids. And I mean, I just thought that that was funny, but I literally like can walk around Nickerson Gardens and I feel safe because the thing is that they keep seeing me. I come back. And that's like the biggest thing to me with trust with government entities or organizations is that you don't just say you're doing something, you're actually doing it. You walk the walk. It's not some glossy brochure. And so when people see you in the community and they see that you're genuine and that you actually care about their kids and you care about what happens to them, that's how you build trust. This morning, I mean, I would have been on earlier, but this morning I literally got a call from a woman who used to live in Nickerson Gardens. She now lives outside. Both of her sons were murdered there years ago, but I have built a relationship with her and trust, and she will just call me when she has a concern about something because she thinks that I will at least know the right person to connect her with. And that's to me, that's been my success, is that people know that I really do care. And I show up and I'm at events on Saturdays and that they can reach out to me and I will answer my phone and I will return a text. And because I'm in the government, because I've been doing this job for 29 and a half years, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people in power that, I mean, I can call like almost, well, I probably could call to the top of DCFS and say, what the heck is happening here? This is not okay, because I've been around for so long. And sadly, because of my title, being the director of child abuse policy and prevention for the LA City Attorney, people take my call. But I use that to help people. And so just, I know my time's almost up, but just like briefly, a perfect example is we had a mother whose daughter was murdered in a domestic violence homicide. The mother had 3 children. The mother's boyfriend shot and killed her in front of the kids. SWAT was called out. He released the children. So now the children are going to go live with grandma, and grandma's like, 50 or 55 or something. And she lives in a 1-bedroom apartment. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment. She wasn't expecting to raise her 3 grandchildren who are now 12, 15, and 8. Like that wasn't part of her plan. And she's in a 1-bedroom Section 8 apartment. And DCFS said that they weren't going to let the kids live there because they were in a 1-bedroom. And I was like, what? And that's ridiculous. So you'll let kids live in a garage, on somebody's property or in a tent because homelessness is not neglect or a crime, but you won't let them stay. And so I went up the chain of command and I said, these kids witnessed their mother murdered. They need to be with their grandma. And they said, well, she doesn't have enough space. And then they said to me, oh, and she has something in her criminal record. And I'm like, what, like, this is just ridiculous. Like, I met this woman, she needs to have these kids. And they said that she had murder in her record. So I was like, okay. So I went back and I talked to grandma, and because she's out of jail, and I said, what's going on? Turns out her mother was murdered by domestic violence. Her daughter has now been murdered by domestic violence, and she killed her abuser and was acquitted by a jury. So I called DCFS up and I said, excuse me, she was acquitted for killing somebody who was hurting her, and you can't hold that against her. If she was acquitted by 12 jurors, you can't hold that against her. And so I was able to keep those kids with their grandma. But I fought with Section 8 and Housing Authority for a year. I had to fight for this grandmother to get her into a 3-bedroom place, so that, because I called Housing Authority, I'm like, You cannot place a 13-year-old boy with his 16-year-old sister or his 8-year-old sister. That is not okay. That's how sexual abuse can happen. You can't do that. Like, they have to have their own space. And grandma was really trying, she worked part-time and she was trying really hard, and they kept denying her and she kept appealing it. And finally, after a year, just a couple weeks ago, they moved into their, it's actually a 4-bedroom house because there was an add-on. And so each child has their own room. And I worked with LAPD and we got them furniture and reached out to our resources. So like, I love my work, as you can tell. I'm really passionate about the work that I do. And I feel blessed in my career that I gave kids a voice in the courtroom for so long. And now I feel like I'm giving them a voice in the community. And I didn't even explain kind of how our process works, but let's just say we respond in the first 24 hours. And I also reach out to LAUSD if they're LAUSD kids to make sure they're getting that extra support at school. So thank you for having me. I see I'm at time and I appreciate being here. And you can ask Karina if anybody has any other questions. You can reach out to me. I hope to partner with more nonprofits. I know that a lot of people want the REACH team to be spread out across LA. And, you know, if I can do that before I retire, I'm 55, I got a few years left, then that would be my goal. So thank you.
Laura, you are getting so much love in the chat, and I'm getting so many text messages about the wonderful work that you do. And thank you for using your privilege and your position to support the families. I always tell Laura that I have now deemed her to be an honorary social worker. I think she's more of a social worker than I am. But I do want to say that I love a lot of the takeaways. I was writing them all down. It's just listening to the community and what does the community want, rather than telling the community what they want, changing the narrative of how we see our children. That's always been a big thing for me as well. Children are not bad and our families are not bad. And then just engage and allow these kids to be seen. It's similar to what Ron said in the morning about feeling heard and seen, and just really, families come back. They come back because they trust the work that you do and you walk the walk. And I know a lot of our staff, I know tons of our staff are the reason why a lot of our families come back, because they have so much commitment. So thank you for just getting us really excited for this day. It's just a great, great way to start.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here and I look forward to working with you more.